I had to look up meretricious. It means excessively showy, flashy, like a prostitute. Back to the Oxford movement. While mid-19th century architects were euphorically recalling the salad days of the Gothic cathedral in England's high Renaissance, liturgists were nosing around vestries and sacristies and reliquaries and ostiaries of all these big old places. And all what they found was a treasure trove of ecclesiastical doodads, gorgeous, colorful vestments, credence tables, sedillas and numeral veils, thuribles and boat boys who had been there for centuries, aspergilla and cabanigras, holy water stoups and aumries, and ceremonial directives so complex that only a verger with a sharp verge could decipher them and put them into operation. In 1868, the Bishop of New York consecrated the parish church of St. Ignatius of Antioch on New York Upper West Side, a dear place to me. I worked there 6 years. Architect Charles H., who was later to build the chapel at General Seminary, said he wanted to design a building that would take the breath away of those who entered it. Tapestry, texture, marble, statuary and painting, vestments and altar hangings, music and high drama, all conspired in this shrine of a building to give the congregant a distinct impression that she had entered the kingdom of heaven. A solemn high mass that resembled that of the Latin Roman Catholic Mass, but with heavy-duty sprinklings of cerum, that is English ceremonial, took the participant right out of his pew and hurled the participant into the glory seat itself. It was just like the call of Isaiah. The effect was the transformation of humanity, or so they hoped. Humanity ransomed, renewed, restored, and forgiven through the gift of solemn worship that utilized all 5 senses of the human body, and then the 6th sense of intuition, and maybe even the 7th sense of experiencing God. Humanity so recharged and re-energized by Eucharistic worship and ceremonial piety that it was well-equipped and spiritually prepared then to go into the streets of degradation and decay, and to serve the plight of men and women who suffered every social ailment ever to come down the pike because of industrialization and urbanization. One of the great contributions of the Oxford movement that we should never forget was its emphasis that worship is never, ever an end in itself. It's always a means to an end. And that end is service to others by those who are transformed. Sadly, Anglo-Catholic worship in so many places did become an end in itself. And that forgetfulness often cost these congregations their mission in the streets and eventually their lives. When high churchmen, let's see here. This is, do you know when you go to the theater in New York City, it says there will be a 3-minute intermission. This is a segue into Bishop Ives and his embrace of what was going on in England and bringing it to these shores. But I would like for you for a moment just to stand up and take a breather. 3 minutes, that's all. Just stand up. Northeast American sophisticate and bon vivant Levi Silliman Ives arrived in North Carolina after his consecration up north in 1831. He found a vast geographical expanse replete with only a tiny handful of priests, a communicant strength of less than 1,000, and a legacy of fiercely self-differentiated episcopal identity thanks to First Bishop Ravenscroft. Ravenscroft, who actively shunned and scorned his Protestant neighbors, and then a miserable track record of securing sufficient clergy to staff the few congregations and to preach the pure and undefiled religion of English Catholicism. In Ives' first address to Diocesan Convention in North Carolina He assessed the situation, which must have given him great pause. He iterated the principles of high churchmanship, and he proposed that his priests, even the few of them, take on additional responsibilities of serving clergyless congregations with ministration of word, of course, and also sacrament. It has to be word and sacrament. Furthermore, he urged educated laymen to consider taking on the vocation of priesthood, not ministry. He didn't use that word, priesthood. And he delivered the first of many exhortations about opening schools that would educate the illiterate masses all over this state. But not only schools of the secular variety, but also schools with an additional component dedicated to theological education, training men for the exercise of priesthood, not ministry. That's where we're getting baptism, but priesthood, consecrated for a particular kind of service. For 15 years, he pleaded, if not demanded, that the diocese open such training centers, fund their construction and maintenance, and staff them with just the right kind of Anglican divines so that God's mission in North Carolina could be fully realized. Ives, being a high churchman, relied on the grace of his episcopal office to build up the body and to bring in the sheaves. As a direct descendant of the apostles through the historic succession of bishops, he knew beyond shadow of doubt that he embodied sufficient grace to do the work that he had been given to do, and despite all odds would see it to its glorious conclusion. But you know, nothing worked. If grace were operative, it was much, much less than amazing. Ives never was able to attract large clumps of clergy to North Carolina, and when they did come, they didn't stay too long. 5 years into his episcopate and no sign of fulfilling any mission, high or low, Ives concluded that importing clergy from New York and the Northeast was a dreadful mistake. What North Carolina needed, he said enthusiastically, was a homegrown convocation of clergy, men who were raised here, could be trained here, and most certainly would stay here. The short-lived Episcopal school in Raleigh was just such an attempt to get the ball rolling. But after a very short time, it became obvious that the ball would not budge. The ideal of a school, Coombe Theological Academy, failed in Raleigh. The buildings and property had to be sold after only a 2-year run. The scholarly mentors went home from whence they came, and a whole whopping debt of $14,000 put the diocese, at least in the scopes of bankruptcy. Somehow, Bishop Ives himself retired the debt and saved his ass. But out of the ashes, the phoenix ascends. Levi Ives got wind of his brother-in-law's mission in the Wisconsin wilderness. This is exciting. And he was immediately convinced, the man was impetuous, that it was just the kind of operation that would serve the North Carolina wilderness, to wit, the mountain areas in the western part of the state. Bishop Hobart's son, John Henry, along with several other enthusiastic graduates of General Seminary, left New York to found a mission station in the wilderness of Wisconsin. An Episcopal enclave of sorts in a rural area. Does that not echo something else that had happened a few years before? A church, a college of clergy, people who would maintain the mission with their own hard labor, but also leaven the surrounding lump of people with preaching to the non-church, pastoral care to all, and a semi-monastic way of life that could endure hardship and weather any kind of storm, and most of all, save money. Thus the beginnings of what we now know as Nashotah House near Delafield, Wisconsin. So here he was, romantic in his vision and impetuous in his decision-making. I've spotted the perfect place for such a community, a valley near the portion of a beautiful river where is formed a distinct shape of the cross. It was Valley Crucis. Just as soon as he could wrangle funds from a now hesitant, if not resistant, diocesan convention, he planned to set up a dynamic mission in Valley Cruces. He wanted to build inexpensive adobe-style buildings and to secure the services of educated priests and to attract mountain boys to further their educations and to put a few of them in position for God to call them to higher service. Ives could finally see the province beyond the Watauga River. The promised land for him was in sight. What our enterprising and seemingly impulsive bishop didn't expect, though, was the vast number of honeybees who drilled nests into the soft clay walls of the adobe buildings and caused them to crumble within 18 months. What he didn't consider was the profligacy, profanity, and ill-mannered behaviors of the mountain boys, who loved their whiskey and their card sharking more than the study of prayer book rubrics. What he didn't contemplate was the sheer impossibility of attracting and keeping clergy in an outpost so close to the end of the earth that some of them said on a clear day they could see it. Failure loomed large one more time for Bishop Ives. And now he was 16 years into his episcopate, 1847, getting very close to his 50th birthday, moving toward once again losing face with his diocese. His energies were flagging, his visions were clouding, and his hopes for a school/seminary, the grace of apostolic succession notwithstanding, were dwindling. Just in the nick of time, and I'm sure he felt it that way, the Oxford movement saves the day, or so he thought. By mid-century, the Tractarians had morphed into the Ritualists. Head and heart of this divine corrective were melded together. The Oxford movement had reached the eastern shores of the North American continent, and Bishop Ives was right to receive it as he peddled the theological correctives of the High Church party. Not only the firm theology embodied in High Church theology, but also what I call those ecclesiastical doodads that came to us through ritualism. Outward and visible liturgical signs along with inward and spiritual graces. Before cashing in his chips, taking his losses, and moving on, Ives tried one more time to revive the school at Valley Cruces. Somehow he drafted a priest from the north who was well-versed in high churchmanship, who understood all the new trends in ritualism, and who spoke the King's English when it came to establishing a school of the Anglican Catholic ethos. The Reverend William French, who was the first in these parts to prefer the title Father French, came to Valley Cruces in 1848 and gave new energies to a mountain school that would double as a training ground for Episcopal clergy. And to get this evangelistic effort on the road, all the way into the mountainous nooks and crannies of this state. Underline this. It is impossible to imagine high church Anglicanism without a missionary evangelical thrust. That must be part of it. Everywhere where it had success, that was always part of it. High churchmanship is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. And that end is the transformation of humanity through solemn worship and through unflagging service, most especially to the poor, the weak, the sick, and the lonely.